In this Pro Tips episode of Midlife by Design, we dive into how to find your birth time. Whether you're clueless as to the time, have a rounded birth time that ends with a 0 or a 5, or maybe you want to find somebody else's birth time, this episode is for you. I'm your host, Lori Lisai. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to Midlife by Design. Today we are diving into what if you don't know your exact birth time. This can definitely be an issue for a lot of people if sometimes the time isn't on your birth certificate, even if you have found your birth certificate. Sometimes you can't find it. Sometimes your parents don't remember the exact time that you were born, but they can give you kind of a basic idea. And it's important to know the exact time of your birthday. So I'm going to show you a few different ways to figure that out. The first thing I want you to understand is why it's important to know your exact birth time. Going back to the principle that human design is partly based on astrology and the fact that we live in this ever-evolving, ever-changing, always moving, it's important to have the exact time because the planets are constantly moving, the Earth is constantly moving, and your birth time is a snapshot of the exact moment that you entered the world. So the minutes really matter. And this episode is a great episode to listen to if you have a birth time that's like 8:30 or 8:35. Be wary of rounded birth times to the 0 or to the 5. Sometimes they're correct, right? Like definitely people are born on the 30s and on the 35s or on the 05s and on the 0s, but it's also really good to just get curious about that and wonder if that was your exact birth time. So we're going to dive into 3 different ways that you can find your birth time and just kind of experiment. The first thing I would say is, from a human design perspective, just running your birth chart. Go right to my website, lorilisai.com, and go to get your chart and start with running a number of different charts to look at the differences. So plug in your birthday and your birth location, and then for your time, start at 12:01 and download that chart, have it ready, and then run another chart for noon. And then run another chart for 11:59 p.m. So you have snapshots then from the very beginning of the day to the middle of the day to the end of the day. And then put those 3 charts out in front of you and take a look at the sun gates, the moon gates, and your energy type. And see what shifts. See if there are any things that change within that time frame. Now, the moon will change 2 to 3 times a day, so that's definitely one of the things that is going to change more often, one of the luminaries that will change more often in your birth chart, versus a planet like Pluto, which changes generationally. So if you happened to be born on a day when Pluto was changing signs, that's going to be a relatively rare occurrence as opposed to the moon. So having these 3 charts in front of you will give you kind of an overview of what changes you do have when you're looking at the 3 charts. So if your moon changes from a Cancer moon to a Leo moon, that's important to note because the moon is really about what motivates you, what drives you. So then you can get curious, like, okay, do I tend to be motivated more by things related to my family or my emotions, or some of the kind of stereotypical Cancer themes like nurturing? Or am I more motivated by Leo themes like independence and the desire to be seen and really getting out there and lighting things up? So those are definitely more Leo themes. So that's one place that you can start to get curious, and this is where the experiment component of human design comes in, because it might just take you playing around with it a little bit to figure out, what the timing comes down to. What can happen when the planets change is that definition can change. So, for example, if you have gate 52, for example, in the root center, and you don't have gate 9 in the chart that you run at 12:01 a.m. But then later in the day, when you run your chart at noon, the moon comes into gate 9. And it makes that suddenly 52-9 channel. And now you've got a defined root and a defined sacral. Whereas earlier in the day, if you were born at 12:01 a.m., then you only had the defined root, potentially, with that gate, and you've got no sacral, which means that you are no longer a generator type. So it changes quite a bit if your moon or some of those other faster moving planets move into a gate that then creates what's called definition. So it's like lighting up two of your centers that then connect to each other by a channel, and that definition is what creates your energy type. And remember that energy types are sort of similar to the zodiac signs. There are 5 different energy types, and if you are a manifester or a projector or a reflector, all non-sacral types, that's a very different lived experience than it is to be a generator or a manifesting generator. So it's really important to understand what can change throughout the day, and those are some of the things that you're looking for. If you look at the 3 charts that you run and see what is consistent throughout the day, that's a really great place to start, because that is reliable information for you. You know the day, you know the location, and so when you know those things, you can look at the things that don't change throughout those 3 charts and realize, like, okay, this is actually energy that I carry within my design, and this is something that I truly can focus on. If you're not really sure, either because you're new to human design or you're just not really comfortable with the results that you're getting with the 3 charts, don't really know how to decipher it, then I do have a couple of other ways to start diving into more specific timing for you, that then you can circle back around and run your chart and then start to really experiment with it. So my second tip is called birth chart rectification. And the first thing you should know before I show you this online tool is that it's not a live astrologer, and when you're doing something called birth chart rectification, it's best done with an astrologer who specializes in this type of work. So what the process looks like is you giving that person your birthday and your birth location, and then they're going to talk to you about different things that have happened in your lifetime that will help them to sort of reverse engineer the time that you were born. So it's a pretty cool process. It does take a little while. I have some birth chart rectification specialists that I can link in the show notes. I have personally not used them. They came from my human design teacher, but feel free to leave them in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, just so we can all have somebody to reference, to work with, if this is a path that you would like to take. So above all else, I would recommend using one of these people who is actually certified in birth chart rectification. However, if you don't have the means to do that, then this online tool that I'm about to show you is a decent substitute. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here, and if you are listening and not watching, I will just do my best to describe to you what this app looks like and how it works as I'm going through it. So it's called Astro app, and it's just a website that does this work for you. And they've written an introduction about getting your birth chart rectified with an astrologer, and understanding that this web app is helpful, but one of the things that you'll want to do is the detective work beforehand to try to get as accurate a birth time as possible. So asking your parents, your relatives, seeing if you can check out that birth certificate. Sometimes you can even call the hospital where you were born and they will know. But these rectification tools can't replace, the actual time that was recorded when you were born. And again, going back to the idea of the astrologer who can rectify it, they would ultimately be the best person because you'll be able to talk it through with them. The other thing about using this tool is really knowing the person well. So if you're using this for yourself, great. You can answer these questions usually for yourself, with the caveat that if you happen to be listening to this podcast and you're young, you're like under the age of 25, then it's probably not a suitable tool for you because you haven't sort of lived enough life to be able to base your birth time on the events and things that have unfolded in your life. For example, marriage, divorce, we'll get into that. So it's best for people who have lived a bit, namely those people who are probably listening to this Midlife by Design podcast. So we've got this form for data below. So I'm going to put in my name, and then I'm going to put in June, and let's go with 7th. Let's make this person a Gemini, and let's make them born in, where are my Gen X years? Sorry, I scrolled right by them. Let's go with 1973. And then if you don't know your birth time at all, have no idea, just leave it here as listed as noon. And then we're going to make this person born in the US, and let's say they were born in Montana, and let's say they were born in Bozeman. Okay, so I've got the location of this person and the date of this person, and I'm leaving noon as the time. So now I'm going to click continue, and you'll see that it gives me the location, gives me the date, and then it asks some questions here. Specify the authenticity of predisposition for each item in the table. So did this person marry early? And they've got this chart here with yes, definitely, with an exclamation point. Then there's sort of this yes, a little less emphatically. Then there's a question mark, like, not sure. Then there's a no, and then there's a definitely no. So let's make this woman not having an early marriage. Was she married to a foreigner? Oh, sure. Let's say yes. Has she had numerous abortions? Let's say no. Has she experienced emigration, either voluntary or compelled? Let's say yes, since she was married to a foreigner. Maybe there's something interesting that happened there. Has she had significant creative success? Sure. Has she lost her residence? Let's say no. Okay. So now those are the only questions in this section of the form for this person. Then we're going to move to the next section where they give you a list of specific events that have or have not taken place, and then they ask you to select the month and year that it happened. So let's say she got married in August of 2006, and she hasn't been divorced, and maybe she had one child who was born in May of 2009, and then her mother and father are still alive, but maybe she lost her grandmother in September of 2000. And her grandfather is still around. Maybe her brother and sister are still around, and her husband, and she hasn't lost a child, and she hasn't had an abortion. She hasn't been imprisoned. How about an extreme situation? Let's say she had a heart attack in December of 2023. And let's say she had surgery in October of 2015 and no serious disease. Okay, so these are all just life events that may or may not have happened to you. If they did, do your best to be as accurate as possible when completing the form there in terms of month and year. Now, here's what we've got. Look at this. We have a 100% chance that this girl was born June 7th, 1973 at 11:55 a.m. A 98% match for her to be born at 11:56. Also 98, 11:57, 11:58, 11:59. So what I would do then is take those times and plug them into the human design tool and see what shifts, if anything shifts, what changes, and what resonates with you. So that is this rectification tool that seems pretty good, again, in the absence of an actual human doing the work for you. So that is tip number 2, to use this rectification tool to help you tap into your actual birth time. Now, the third tool that I have for you is something that you might consider a little bit on the woo spectrum, but I'm going to show you because it is something that I use and something I think is very powerful. Richard Rudd, who's the genius behind the Gene Keys, has talked about intuition and how all information in the universe is available to us through our intuition. So what I want to suggest to you is using a pendulum. And when I say a pendulum, what I use for a pendulum, if you're watching, you can see that I have just a crystal on a string. It's this elongated crystal if you're listening. And it's just a simple tool. Pendulums are a beautiful thing, I think, to help you narrow down your birth time. And I'm going to show you exactly how they work, and also just encourage you to trust your own intuition in terms of tapping into the collective consciousness. You can look at using a pendulum as just another way to confirm or narrow down your birth time. And I think the most maybe important thing when you're considering using a pendulum is to really trust yourself and trust it to give you the right answer and to not doubt it, because I think when you allow that doubt in, it colors the answers that you get. So this is how you use it. First of all, I would be resting my elbow on a table just to steady it, because the pendulum speaks in yes or no answers, and you'll see the difference in how the pendulum moves when you ask a yes or no answer. So I am recording this today on July 25th, and what I might do is just ask it, is today, July 25th, a Thursday? And what's happening is it's moving away from me and toward me. It's moving back and forth away from me and toward me, like a north-south kind of direction. So it's telling me that today is Thursday. That's a yes. So I'm starting with questions that have nothing to do with the birth time. They're just testing the pendulum to say, hey, how are you going to talk to me? How are you going to communicate with me? All right, and then I'm going to just touch the tip of the pendulum to bring it back to center. And then I'm going to ask it, is today Monday? And then if you're watching, you can see that the pendulum is moving east to west. It's moving side to side as opposed to back and forth in front of me. Okay, so now I know what a yes and a no looks like. So now what you want to do in terms of your birth time is ask it yes or no questions about this birth time. So the first thing I do is get crystal clear with who I'm asking about. So I am looking for Lori Lisai's birthday time in June of 1973, and I would like your help in determining that, pendulum. So was Lori born after 12 o'clock p.m.? Was Lori born after 12 o'clock p.m.? Okay, and now we're getting it, it's moving. Yes. Okay, yes she was. So you see sometimes it takes a few seconds for the pendulum to respond. Okay, was Lori born between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m.? Okay, I'm getting a yes. Yes, she was. Okay, and so now I've got the hour. Now, was Lori born after 10:30? p.m. Was Lori born after 10:30 p.m.? It's thinking. Yes. Okay. Wonderful, thank you. Okay. And I'm going to just narrow it down one more time because I know what time I was born. Okay. Now, was Lori born at 10:53 p.m.? And I'm getting another yes. Okay. So this is the concept of how a pendulum works. Thank you, pendulum. And basically just tapping into that intuitive knowing. I find that this tool really works well when you're able to be centered, when you trust it, when you're willing to tap into the woo, when you're also willing to just look at the time that you receive and then plug it in to the tools that I have given you. So plug it back into the birth chart rectification and run it through there answer those questions about the different things that may have happened in your life, and then see what the likelihood is of that time being correct for you. And then run your human design chart for that time and look at it. Look what it says about you. What is your energy type? What are the different components of your chart? And start to then experiment. Start to really get curious about what does your chart have to say for you. Pay particular attention to what feels good in your body in terms of when you're looking at the different charts or the different results that you're receiving. Is there anything that's pulling you in? Is there anything that just feels right? Is there anything when you're reading through the description that just really hits for you? And then above all else, like I said, just play with what you learn and see how it resonates. Human design is always meant to be an experiment. It's a tool for self-awareness. It's a way to get curious about why you do the things that you do, how you might find better alignment. And honestly, if human design or the things that you're learning are making you feel more constrictive, or if you find yourself boxing yourself in, then it's definitely not serving you. So it's not a prescriptive tool. It is just a tool to use for you to better understand how your energy works. So I hope that these 3 tips were helpful for you. Running human design charts and comparing them, using the Astro app for birth chart rectification, with a huge caveat that humans are the best way to do that birth chart rectification process, and then using a pendulum. So I would suggest using all 3 of these things in conjunction with one another to narrow down your birth time. And I would also suggest that if you have a birth time that ends with a 0 or a 5, going through this process to see if there are any times that resonate a little bit more than your current birth time. So I hope this episode was helpful. Thank you so much for tuning in, and tune in further for more pro tips. This one is the first of many tips that I hope to offer for you that will help you to not only understand your human design, but really use it in your life. So thanks for tuning in. Until next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Midlife by Design. I would love to hear from you. If you have a question about human design or a struggle with midlife that you would love for me to cover on this podcast, please send me a message on Instagram at Lori Lisai, which is LORILISAI. And if you loved this podcast, I would so appreciate it if you left a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, because this helps the show get in front of new listeners. And it is really my message to reach and support as many midlife mamas as possible. Please remember, as I sign off, may you always have the strength to let your baggage go, the determination to remember the light within you, and the courage to be who you came here to be.